Hey everybody, I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and other leaders maximize their potential, build rock-solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Margaret Atwood said, "A voice is a human gift. It should be cherished and used to utter fully human speech as possible. Powerlessness and silence go together." Well, on today's episode, we're going to talk about unlearning silence, how we learn silence, how we silence ourselves and unintentionally silence others, finding our voice, 4 steps for learning how to speak up, and more. My guest is a wife and mother. She's a USA Today bestselling author, speaker, and facilitator who works with organizations and individuals to build skills in communication, collaboration, and conflict resolution. She holds B.A.s in political science and music from the University of California Berkeley and a Juris Doctor from Harvard Law School. She's a former managing partner of Triad Consulting Group and lecturer on law at Harvard Law School, specializing in dispute resolution, mediation, and negotiation. Her list of clients reads like a who's who of the most well-known brands, including American Express, Chevron, Google, Nike, Pixar, and many others. Please welcome the woman who's teaching us how to speak our mind, unleash talent, and live more fully, Elaine Lin Hering. Elaine, it is so great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me, Jay. More freedom? Sign me up.
I tell you, I love it. I'm so very much looking forward to this conversation. I know it's going to be a good one, and I know that those that are watching and listening are just going to be so engaged and interested to learn and to hear of your insights and your story. So let's dive right in. I thought a good starting point for us, Elaine, would be for you to share with us what your favorite thing is about yourself and why. Why that particular thing?
Oh, I love this already. I'm going to go with humility. My humility is my favorite thing about me.
Tell me
And
more.
I'm starting there because there's an interesting relationship with it.
Okay.
I think I was raised to be humble, right? You don't want to toot your own horn. You want to serve others. And there's a shadow side to that. You don't end up writing a book about silence without having lost a part of yourself or silenced a part of yourself over time. But where humility to me comes into play is not a diminishing of who I am or what I've done, but an acknowledgement of how I fit into a bigger world, which is I am but one person. I have a ton to learn, and not getting caught up in thinking I know it all because I know I don't. That humility to me allows me to continue to learn, to be curious about other people, to be able to see the good and the value in the people around me, and makes for a really interesting, fun, never dull life.
I love that. Humility. So has that trait of humility been a part of who you are throughout your entire life? Is it something that you discovered as you went along, something that you've continued to build upon? Share a little bit of that piece of the story.
Yeah, I think it's as with any relationship, an ongoing, ever evolving relationship with humility. So I grew up, I'm the youngest daughter of an immigrant family to the States. I grew up in the Christian church. There's a lot of external teaching about what it looks like or should look like to be humble. And that elementary version or relationship with humility to me was more of a, this is what it should look like, this is what I should do to be a good person, and came with an edge of, well, like, Elaine, you're not such hot stuff, so keep yourself humble. And all sorts of relationship and work around that over time to come back to a place of, oh, I sort of like myself. I think I have something to offer, and to use my voice and test that out. And that actually to be humble doesn't mean to diminish the skill set or the gifts or the insights that I have, so much as to see them in context, which is the gifts, the skill sets, the insights I have aren't in competition with other people, but can be additive. And that to me is a more mature relationship and a more honest, accurate version of humility in life of, I don't have to diminish myself in order to celebrate other people. I can appreciate what it is that I have in experience, in insight, in skill set, and honor that and recognize that, such that if other people choose to celebrate me, I can just say thank you instead of deflecting, as so many of us do, to say it wasn't me, it was the team. Let's give credit where credit is due, and okay to acknowledge that I had a role in that. And that piece that we talked about earlier of, and I can fully celebrate and be excited about and be curious to learn from everyone else, because their success, their insight, their gifts don't diminish the ones that I have or hold.
That is so insightful and lands well with me as I'm listening to you, and I'm thinking back on my own journey of humility, which I did not have as much humility then, early in my life, as I do now. But to your point, I'm still a work in progress.
Totally.
But I feel you on so much that you just said. And I love the fact that you mention additive instead of being competitive, and celebrating who you are and what you're able to bring to the table. Now, I know that your early story, let's call it an origin story, if you will, I know that speaks to your story of silence as I read your book. So why don't we tie some of what you just said, culturally speaking, familial relations, etc. Let's go back a bit in time and speak to that story of silence and where the seeds of silence were originally planted for you.
I love that question. And particularly because wherever the seeds of silence are planted are often so invisible to us, and is also not how problem statements or the world is framed to us. So we'll come back to that.
Okay.
But for me, I grew up, I'm the youngest daughter of an immigrant family from Taiwan to the United States. And I share all of those identifiers because in my family of origin, I learned that to respect your elders means to not question them. There is a children are to be seen and not heard. Don't say anything if you can't say nothing nice. Bambi taught me that one. Thank you, Disney. And also grew up in a patriarchal culture where men or boys are more celebrated than girls. And so, of course, you give deference to the men in your life, to the elders in your life, and you want to be respectful of them and to honor their wisdom. They've lived longer, so they know better. So don't question it. That Silence to me was just how things were done. You don't realize that there could be another way when this is just the norm. And when silence is tied to respect or keeping the peace, right? Don't rock the boat. If you say something, then the people around you will get mad, they'll get upset. Do you really want that? Probably not. So then to keep the peace means you keep it to yourself. And over time, you forget that you could even question. You forget that you have a voice, a thought, ideas, insights of your own. And the world around us often reinforces that. So all of that learning made me a really good entry-level worker. Let me back up. It made me a really good student. And not a good student because I got good grades, but because I was obedient and followed the rules in class. And so much of our education system is set up to regurgitate what teachers tell you so you can pass the standardized test. So again, the metrics of what is reinforced and rewarded over time is actually silencing creativity, silencing curiosity, silencing critical thinking because you regurgitate the facts to pass the standardized test so the school gets funding. And then you go to institutions, and I ended up going to some pretty name brand institutions almost by accident. I went to UC Berkeley because it was the local school and it was in-state tuition. It was a great deal at the time.
Cool.
And then you go to work. And if you listen to what your manager says and you do what they tell you and you can anticipate to how to make their life easier, again, you're rewarded for that until you hit the glass cliff, the bamboo ceiling, whatever you want to call it, where you need to show more initiative, you need to have executive presence, all of these catchphrases that are out there. To lead means to have an opinion, to challenge, and you realize I don't have that. I realized I don't have that skill set because I am still of the mindset that if I were to challenge what someone says, that's disrespectful. So that's a really disorienting moment, but also a pivotal moment.
So that storyline, or those stories that we tell ourselves that often tie back to things that we heard from our parents, from grandparents, etc. The ability to have a sense of self-awareness, to recognize those stories, to hear them, to listen to them, to be able to interrupt those stories and reframe them in a way that allows us to show up as our true self, to realize that we have capabilities, abilities, a voice. We can be curious. We can be creative. We can play music. We can do all the things that maybe we were told at one point that we shouldn't do, because something that you said, which was certainly in my mind when I was a young person, was children are to be seen and not heard. And when we hear things like that enough times, tying back to what you said, it creates a dampening of a sense on who we are, who we truly are at our heart, soul, and mind. And as you're sharing some of your story, it takes me back, and I'll just share this for context purposes. When I was young, I was told the same thing by parents and grandparents, that children are to be seen and not heard. And I heard it enough times that I did everything possible to make myself feel small. And when I was in class, as an example, I would sit in the back of the room. I didn't raise my hand. I may have known the answer, but I didn't raise my hand. I didn't want to be heard because I was afraid that if I was, then I wasn't a good boy. And I also would purposely again, make myself small, but I would purposely, as soon as class was over, I would move out of that room as quickly as possible. And ultimately what it did, Elaine, not only did I not find my voice at that early age, but I also wasn't making connections with people. Now, I don't want to point fingers at anyone, but it caused an issue for me in being able to establish relationships because, again, it went back to speaking up and speaking about things that maybe I was interested in, things that I saw in other people that I couldn't speak about. So it has such a dramatic effect, and maybe it doesn't affect everyone the same way. And I'd love to hear from you your thoughts and what your research has shown on that. But it absolutely impacted me and how I was showing up to the world at that early stage.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing part of your story. And, there's a question that follows of what was your evolution and journey with voice that hopefully we'll get to in this story as well. But that piece of we often utilize silence, without realizing that it's happening. This is just how I show up as a good person or as a good child versus what am I actually doing? What am I missing out on? What am I missing? What is the world missing from my not showing up with my thoughts, my uniqueness, my warts even? And from a relational aspect, fundamentally to love someone means to know them and accept them. So if we are hiding parts of ourselves, how can someone really love us? If we are not aware of our own needs or wants, how might someone be able to meet them? From a really simple perspective, if you really like, tacos, but you never share that with anyone, and someone wants to celebrate you, you're going to show up with a generic box of chocolates. When you're like, you know what I would have really felt loved by? Tacos. I don't know why I'm focused on tacos, right? But that piece of it, there is, for those of us, I think particularly who internalize messages like children are to be seen and not heard, and value being easy, the easy person in the relationship, because difficult people are not the ones that you want to hang out with or might not be lovable. There's actually a disservice both to ourselves and to the people around us.
Yes.
In not letting them know who we are. Both means that we aren't loved for who we are, known for who we are. We don't get our needs met. It also means that, as you mentioned, they can't connect with us. And even, well-intentioned leaders in the workplace, well-intentioned family members or friends in your family or chosen family, how can I actually love you if I don't know who you are? Which begs the question, how do I make it safe enough for you to be able to show me parts of yourself or share that, you really don't like tacos, but we'll go get them because I know you like them. Any of those dynamics that people go years, decades without actually knowing one another, when that is the fundamental gift we can give each other. We don't have to agree. We don't have to like the same things. That's part of the beauty. There is enough of any one of us in a relationship or a room or a community. We don't need poor imitations of each other.
How true. And how sad not to be able to make those types of connections and truly be able to connect and get to know one another. But it is a reality. I just know even today there are times that I experience that. I sense it and I feel it now. And I know when I'm either putting a wall up, some sort of barrier, and it speaks to that self-awareness, but that's due to a lot of work to get to that point. So tell us what changed for you. So you're hearing these different things from family, and at what point did you realize that something needed to change. You do have a voice. You deserve to be heard and seen.
Oh, I'm still working on that second part. Just to be really candid.
I appreciate
Right?
that.
You spend a lifetime not being seen, heard, or known, and you sort of get used to it. It's a coping mechanism. Right? So my journey with voice actually came from an academic perspective. I worked on 6 continents across industries, teaching skills for negotiating, having difficult conversations, giving and receiving feedback, tools and frameworks out of the Harvard Negotiation Project. My former business partners were New York Times business bestselling authors, and so there was a stamp of approval on that content. And a lot of my career was actually propagating their ideas, and I got really good at it, which actually is a part of the connection of I didn't think I had a voice. Up until about 2 years ago, I was not sure I had a voice, which is maybe surprising to people when they're like, but you taught at Harvard Law School, you did these things, you've worked at these, how could you look like you have it together? Spoilers, I don't. I don't think what does it mean to have it together? We are human. We are broken. We are messy. Our journeys are non-linear.
Can I ask you a question before you
Yeah.
move on? Were you... I'm trying to think of the best way to frame this. So let me just... I'm actually crystallizing my thoughts a bit as in real time as we're talking here. But was this exhausting for you?
Absolutely.
So I'm curious.
Say the this, though. Which part? Because there's a lot of different parts of the exhaustion.
Okay. Well, I'd like you to answer the question, but what I'm thinking as you were talking about the things that you were doing, and I don't mean exhausting in the fact that, you're working on 6 continents. I'm thinking about you being exhausted, being a certain way, and really starting to learn about yourself and showing up a certain way that was not necessarily who you had been for so many years of your life, and talk about a switch or a change or a transformation. I'm just curious what that experience was like for you.
Disorienting. And I loved earlier in our conversation when you said when I was young, because I feel like you reach a certain point in life. You have to reach a certain point in life to be able to say that phrase. When I was younger, it didn't really bother me because I didn't know anything else. I was so used to trying to fit in to the white suburb that I grew up in, to attaining what I was taught or told was success in the world, right? The degree, the promotion, make partner. Honestly, I didn't really think about it until, and this is the academic part of it, the problem statement around why people don't negotiate or have difficult conversations or speak up is presented so often like a Nike slogan. Just do it. And if you're not doing it or you're not getting the result you want, it must be you. You need more courage. You need more confidence. Essentially, some variety of go fix yourself. And that to me is the wrong question and the wrong problem statement. I understand why it exists. If it is just, hey, Jay, you need to speak up more, you need to fix yourself, then I, as your colleague, as your manager, as your family member, have no liability or responsibility in that equation. But how we respond to each other fundamentally changes the calculation and the outcome as to whether you feel safe to share who you are, share your thoughts, your insights. And that's why just speak up or learn how to speak up, fix yourself is a more convenient perspective for everyone else. To me, it's not accurate, it's damaging, it is incomplete at best, versus the question, what role does silence play on our team, in our organization, in our family, which includes the silence I've learned, the ways you might unintentionally be silencing me, and the ways that silence or support are baked into our policies and our practices. I did not see that question until a moment in my side yard. I was taking out the trash in 2020. I'd been focused on this question of speaking up for a long time. I gave out the same advice that people had given me, right? Be more direct, be less direct, have more courage, be more clear, fill in the blank. And I was nursing a young child. It was COVID. My father had stage 4 cancer, was undergoing chemotherapy. And I was thinking, George Floyd had just been murdered. And I was thinking, why am I not out on the streets protesting? Because that's what it would mean to use my voice. And I realized I have learned silence over time. I was rewarded for it. I became a good worker for it. I got really good at my job because I silenced my own thoughts to channel and be a decent imitation, even a really good imitation of someone else. I didn't question what might be missing from their frameworks, what might be missing from my life. When you talk about freedom to be who you are, to do what you want, to do the things that are meaningful to you. If we have one life to live, how are you going to live that? That doesn't mean living for someone else's metrics. But it was that aha moment in the side yard between the trash cans and the house that I thought, oh, I think everyone's gotten it wrong. The problem statement that we perpetuate because it's more convenient is wrong. We need to ask a different question. And I started to look at this question of silence. And I looked at every corporate scandal of the last 200 years, right? Someone knew, someone said something. There were even whistleblowers, but the people around them didn't want to hear it and silenced them, made it really costly. At times, people took their lives. It is not just the silence I have learned. It is the ways that we silence each other. And the silence isn't always intentional, because I know really well-intentioned leaders who say all the right things. But is there actually room for a difference of perspective, a question? How do you actually react in that moment? Do you have that humility to say, oh, I could hear a different perspective, or the idea didn't come from me, but it's a great idea, so let's act on it, versus, oh, turf wars, or how is this going to make me look, or I'm going to do something that you experience as me throwing you under the bus. And as I started to use these frameworks, this idea of silence, there's an entire body of research called employee and organizational silence, the collective phenomenon of saying nothing because people conclude that it is not worth it and it won't make a difference in your organization anyways.
Wow.
Do you need a moment?
Well, I'm first of all, I'm fascinated. I truly am, and I want to go so deep into a couple areas here. But I also feel that, first of all, for all of you that are watching and listening right now, I know that there's a lot of information here that is being shared, and you're seeing me take notes, right? I take a lot of notes, and I do that because I'm really trying to understand my own thoughts, to be able to take the information and distill it, so when I go back, I have a reference point that I can use to commit something to memory. And I know some of this information at times can be rather deep, I suppose is one word we can use. But I just want you to think about how applicable this is in your own life, in your business, throughout your own culture that you're establishing in your business. And the fact, Elaine, as you mentioned about silencing others, that just really, that hits. I mean, that hits hard, because I try to think about the way that I'm silencing others unintentionally but I'm still doing it, whether it's intentional or not. I mean, I would love to say that if it were intentional, obviously that would be worse, and it would be. But I'm still doing it. And I know that many of you right now that are watching this and listening to this are doing the same thing, and you don't even realize that you're doing it. So let's stay on silencing others for a couple more moments. But I'd like to flip the script a little bit on how we can become more aware of it, so we can catch it before it goes too far. But then most importantly, and this is what one of the things that I love about your book, is as you look at the action steps, the things that we can actually do about it, the things that we can, the questions that we should be asking ourselves. You had a moment in 2022 in that backyard, and you realized something about yourself, and you decided in that moment that things were going to change. This opened up a door for you to explore and go so deep on this, and then be able to share your gifts with the world, right? You were already doing good work, but now you can reach the masses through your words and through your work.
Pause that though, because that framing, I love it. I want to see a Netflix special made of it. It has like a cinematic quality. It did not feel that clear. And I shared that in that moment. It felt clear of, I think there's an idea here, but I want to share that disorienting, that confusion, that, is this really a thing? And the key piece, though, was actually experimentation over the course of weeks, months, probably even years, to get feedback from other people of, oh, this resonates, this speaks to this part of my story. Oh, that's why my team's not telling me what they really think, and they're leaving it for the employee survey where things are anonymous, even though I ask them every week for feedback, right? That frustration. There's a lot of beta testing that happens that to me then was feedback of, oh, I'm onto something here. So for anyone who feels like those moments are aha moments and the skies parted, no, it was cloudy, it was murky, there was no dramatic music, but there was a hunch of, well, then what do I do with this? And I'm a big proponent of action, of try something using the frame of experimentation, because doing something will tell you something. You will get new information, new data based on the reactions, versus inaction, you don't learn anything new. And you can always go back to the way things were in terms of your own behaviors and say, oh, well, that didn't work, or I don't like that. But trying something. And to the point of silencing others, I mean, this is chapter 5 of the book, and then chapter 9 of the book are concrete steps of how to stop silencing people. But even this conversation, that you are listening to this conversation, is cultivating that awareness that silence could be a thing. And ask yourself the question, what do I think of that? Does that resonate? Does it not resonate? And I start there because for many people, silence is survival. Silence is a strategy for staying safe. And I talk about that in chapter 3 of When It Makes Sense. And for some people, if your voice has always been normed, if you've been part of the dominant group, meaning male in a male-dominant environment, you may not have thought about silence before. And I've facilitated those conversations where people are like, oh my gosh, you're saying it's not me? You're saying it's this thing called silence? And other people are like, I don't get it. Or why is it hard for you to speak up? Just do it. I speak up all the time, therefore you should be like me. But if we pause and think about it, we're all different people with different life experiences. So obviously we would have different wiring and different perceptions of fears and costs. And of course, power, identity, and privilege mean that our experiences in the moment are different as well. So step 1 is just awareness. And then, there's a lot more we can go into about how not to silence people. Do you want me to go there?
Let's talk about that. I think that's such an important portion of your book. I mean, the whole book is each component serves a purpose. This particular area, as I mentioned, it just really hit me hard because it's an area that I began to realize that I was doing this, and it hurts. Quite honestly, it just hurts once you realize, because I felt, and I've done it in my marriage, I've done it at work, I've done it with coworkers, I've done it with partners. It just, so let me stop there, turn it back over to you. So let's go a bit deeper on this, and let's talk about the tools. So we've talked about awareness, and let's continue down that path, if you would.
Absolutely. And I want to appreciate that even if you have the gut punch, that you're still leaning into the conversation. Because the worst thing is and denial. I don't do this. I'm a good person. To me, to be human means that we will inevitably silence other people. If you want a really, not because we intend, but because human nature is to assume that everyone else is like us. And so it takes intentionality and design and effort to remember Jay is not Elaine. Ipso facto, therefore, we would be wired differently. Things would hit us differently. We would not have the same preference. Right? But that is slow thinking, not fast thinking. That is not reactivity. That is response. All the things that are always on culture doesn't support. So what can we do? One is to notice it. Two is, right, one way that we silence people is that if we don't actively design the way that we communicate, the modes and mediums that we're using, the times of day that we're having our meetings, we tend to default to the communication preferences of the people with the most organizational power, right? You're the founder, you're the CEO, or who have been here the longest. And it's such a simple question to ask. Do you have night owls on your team, but you have a standing 9 a.m. meeting? Reality is they are not going to be firing on all cylinders at that point in time. And you are not trying to silence them, but your choice of time inclines them towards silence because the coffee has not made it into their system yet. And I say this in my own marriage. I am a morning person, 5 to 7 a.m. Let's go run a marathon. 9 p.m., I'm eyes droopy, almost asleep. My husband is a night owl. 9 p.m., he is like, let's go. Let's save the world. Okay, this took us a while to figure out, and it's sort of problematic because I start to go downhill right after lunch. 1 p.m., I'm done. Noon, he's just starting to warm up. Like it's okay to talk with him. So we basically have noon to 1 p.m. for serious conversations like financial planning. And so it's sort of amazing that we're still married. But to understand that if I am having the conversation or trying to have the conversation with him at 9 a.m., it's not going to go well. I'm also not going to get his best thinking. He's not going to feel cared for or supported. And same thing if he tries to do it at 9 p.m. to me. So how do we optimize for voice? And optimizing for voice doesn't mean, well, can't talk to you then. And maybe there's no window, particularly if you're working on global teams. There is no perfect time zone. I have looked for it. Someone is flexing. But can we at least be intellectually honest that if you're asking someone to get on a call at 4 a.m. their time, they are not likely to bring their best thoughts and insights. And that may be okay, but let's be honest about it rather than saying, why can't you show up more? You haven't added value, therefore we can't promote you. It's not an easy or even playing field. The other I have to harp on is a difference in wiring. So there are some people who process information best in real time, meaning the more we talk through something, the more clear it gets. Those people prefer phone calls, video calls, in person. And then there are those of us who are in the meeting. We can't quite figure out what to say. 20 minutes after the meeting, we're like, that's what I wanted to say. If you've ever had that moment, welcome to being a post-processor. In workplaces, post-processing is seen as a weakness, and you get advice in your performance review that says, be quicker on your feet, more agile. Versus, that is a difference in wiring, not weakness. And what if we still had the meeting for the real-time processors, but instead of making a decision in that arbitrary 30-minute window that we've scheduled at a suboptimal time, we said, here's where I think we're circling toward. Everyone sleep on it. And we have the luxury of sleeping on it because we've planned and designed ahead of time. Everyone sleep on it. As you post-process, whatever comes up, reply all on the email. And you've done a couple of things there. One is you've normalized that post-processing is not a weakness. It's simply wiring. You've also made clear the avenue for voice, meaning if I have something to say, where do I go, right? So many people get stuck. Well, the meeting's over. I missed my shot. This is not a Hamilton musical. So do I reply all? Do I just call up Jay? And it gets overwhelming with all the choices. Do I go onto Slack? Is that going to be seen as not conversational, not relational? We get stuck and we stay silent because there are so many barriers to entry or in engaging in the conversation. Versus, how might we design the way we work together, the way we communicate to optimize for voice, reducing those barriers, to incline people toward voice rather than inclining each other toward silence.
Wow, this is so good. This is so good. And, as you were talking about night owls and being aware of time zones, etc., and that we operate efficiently at different times, I had interviewed the sleep doctor on this podcast, and he was talking about all the different types of individuals from, night owls, the early birds. He has different language for it, but it really is interesting because it reminded me of the love languages.
Yes.
And that until we have the secret code, if you will, that it keeps us from being able to really connect, have good conversation, meaningful conversation. And this is very similar, right? Once we understand someone's, let's say, internal operating system, how they communicate most effectively, when they are at their strongest mentally, physically, when they're able to process information, share ideas, when they're most creative, it's up to all of us to be able to have those kinds of conversations to determine that so we can allow that individual to express their greatness because it benefits all of us.
That's what I mean by unleash talent.
I love it.
Right? Why there's so many expectations. And I've heard this from different people too of I'm really working to be a morning person. Like that's a lot of energy put toward changing something that is really fundamentally wired into you, and there's a whole system and industry around it that if you pay the money, they'll take your money. But what if it was to acknowledge what is easiest for you, and how might we be able to work asynchronously to give you time to think, that it's a lot easier for you to type than talk, or the opposite way, and let that be okay. Because then you can spend the energy that you otherwise take in trying to conform into one specific narrow mold that maybe we haven't thought about or interrogated, and take that energy into doing whatever work we're trying to do together, and bringing your insights instead of spending that energy, that bandwidth that get consumed into these specific molds that somehow we ended up with.
Wow. This is so powerful. So I want to switch gears to another area, if we can, for a moment. And it is around, so this would be an action item, but the steps to be able to learn how to speak up. And I would love it if you would explore maybe a couple of these areas, because this is something that I see. I'm so aware of it today as I look around the people that I'm surrounded by, while I look at people who are showing up at conferences and seminars and workshops and things that are, they go to the same workshops and the same programs over and over again, looking for that magic bullet, where my belief is, unless it's a specific skill, but my belief is the magic is in you, right? Totally. You have it within yourself. It's a matter of being able to pull that out and be able to use that gift that you have. So let's talk about speaking up. Yeah. How do we get better at that? What are some of the tactical things that we can do?
Tactically, and this is sort of the overarching mindset, is adopting a mindset of experimentation. Because an experiment, the point of an experiment is to learn something, not to get to a specific outcome. So often when people think about speaking up, I said something and nothing changed. I said something and I wasn't promoted. I said something and I didn't get that job. Therefore, I failed. Versus experimenting, let me try something, see what I learn. That's the overall mindset I'd start with. Then very tactically, I outline 4 anchors in the book. And it's intentionally 4 anchors as things you can grab onto when the waves inevitably get tough or you feel disoriented. And that's in contrast to offering a script. So often people are like, just tell me the words. Again, that's that magic bullet approach. I don't know your context. I don't know your style. I don't know the people you're talking with. I could give you a script, but it wouldn't work, because it's also, if it's not authentically you, you're not as powerful. So the 4 anchors are: start with why. What is your bigger why? Why is it worth it to you to speak up, to share your thoughts? For me, adding to the canon of what's out there in terms of communication and conflict management, being able to ask a better question, or what I believe is the right question, that was a big why as to why stomach the discomfort of being really public, or much more public than I've been, of incurring the risk of what if I've gotten it wrong, of the arduous task of writing a book and everything that comes with it. But that bigger why of, I don't want people to feel like they are deficient when they're not, all because we framed the problem statement incorrectly. Right? That's a bigger why to me. Second is connect the dots. As much as we might hope that other people can read our minds, they can't. And, that's an incredibly frustrating moment. I share an anecdote in the book called Toiletgate about a conversation my husband and I had along those lines. But can we connect the data we have to the reasoning that we use, to the conclusions we have, to spell it out for each other? And it makes sense. Again, we don't sit necessarily in the same role or the same city or certainly the same life experience. Why would we expect that other people would think just like us and get it? So connect the dots. Third is make your ask clear. If you are asking for something, it should be clear to the other person what you're asking for. And that if you were to say, hey, I want tacos, let's go back there again. Right? It is much more clear how they can meet that need, or what the ask that they're trying to evaluate actually is, versus the old YouTube video. It's not about the nail. You can go Google that if it's not familiar. But what are you actually asking for? Are you asking for a thought partner? You're asking for someone to just listen to you vent. We miss each other so often because it's not clear how I can show up for you. And again, being well-intentioned, I want to show up for you, but I don't know how to do that. So in terms of speaking up, make your ask clear, because I want to show up for you and you can help me know how. Including, I don't know what I'm really asking for, but maybe just listen to me, right? That's fine too.
I've done that.
It's a good one. The last anchor is embrace resistance. Again, so often when we speak up, we don't get the outcome we want right away. We think it's futile. It wasn't worth it. That's a failure. I'm not going to try it again. versus in resistance is just part of the process. It is the part of the process. Researchers would call it the voice cultivation process if we really want to be technical about it. But of course, you wouldn't understand right away, even though in my magic world, I'd want you to. You asking questions, you having concerns, that there's pushback is a way for us to get to greater understanding and problem solving with each other. And there's a really tactical perspective of, if I expect that there's going to be resistance, when it shows up, it's oh, there it is. I was expecting it. There it is. Versus oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. This is deeply uncomfortable and I'm thrown off my game. Versus, okay, talk to me about those concerns. Here's how I'm thinking about it. How are you thinking about it? I hadn't thought about that. Let me circle back in 2 weeks. Right? Again, we're not confined to that moment. We're not missing our shot. It's how do we be in relationship over time, to work together over time, to figure out how to collaborate together over time. And that friction, that resistance is part of the puzzle. So how do we embrace it? That's the fourth anchor.
So brilliant. So 4 anchors: know your why, connecting the dots, make the ask clear, and embracing resistance. This is so great. Such a brilliant conversation. For all of you watching and listening right now, we have been talking about Unlearning Silence. We're going to provide a link in the show notes to be able to purchase a copy of this book. I would encourage you to not walk, but run to go buy a copy of this book immediately. There is so much value packed inside this book, and it is a game changer. You're going to learn a lot about yourself, and you're going to be provided the tools, as long as you're willing to consume and then put into practice what you learn, but you're going to receive the tools on how you can improve in these areas in your own life and in your business. So definitely make a point to go out and purchase a copy of the book. So Elaine, as we are wrapping up our conversation here, which, by the way, it's been a remarkable one. That the time goes by so quickly, but I'm so appreciative of you spending time with us here today and sharing your insights. A couple of quick things. First, I would love it if you would give all of us, including me, a challenge. What is one thing that you would challenge us to do starting immediately?
Try something. Try something. If you are someone who struggles with speaking up, experiment with asking a question. If you are someone who doesn't tend to focus on your own needs, experiment with asking yourself, what do I think? What do I need? And it can be low stakes, like, I really want tacos for dinner. And see, the other person may push back, right? Embrace resistance. And they're like, no, we're having chicken. You're like, okay. But what that moment teaches you in expressing a preference is that you're still standing. The relationship is still okay. And you get enough of those data points over time and you realize, I do have a voice. I can express a preference, an insight, a thought, and I'm still standing. And by the way, I might have gotten what I actually wanted, or the other person knows me better. Try something. And if you are someone who doesn't struggle with speaking up, try something too. And that could be asking different questions so that other people are more likely to tell you what they think. So often we say, what do you think? Or we assume that if someone had something to say, they would just say it because that's what we would do. Versus this well-intentioned question, what do you think? Can feel like a trap, particularly to someone who reports to you, someone whose paycheck you sign off on. So I'd be asking, what about this works? What about this doesn't work? What are the pros of this idea? What are the cons of this idea? You get the insight and the different perspectives that are just built into how we work together here at this company or in this community. And it's a lower risk for the other people. Try something.
I love that. as you were sharing that last piece to trying something, it reminded me of, for someone who doesn't have an issue with speaking up, who has found their voice, try creating space for someone else to be able to use their voice, for someone else to share what is on their mind, to share their idea, to share.
And let me be really tactical about that.
Okay.
Use your social capital. Use the skill set you have. It is not hard for you to speak up. Say, hey, Jay, tell us more about that idea. Or what do you think we're missing from this conversation? Or better yet, in a group dynamic, because there's greater social threat whenever there's multiple players in the mix, right? Hey, James, I'd love if you could share with the group what you're working on, because I think you have the most detailed analysis I've ever heard on this issue. You are endorsing that person to give them the stage so A, they don't have to fight for the space. And if anyone else wouldn't have listened to James in the first place because of whatever they think about that person, you have offered your personal endorsement. You are lending your social capital to create that space and give them that platform. Offer public support rather than just private commiseration. We could go on forever, but hopefully that gives you something to try.
Oh, yeah. That is brilliant. Thank you for adding that to the conversation as well. So, Elaine, here is my final question to you. What is one of the greatest gifts that life has given you that you didn't realize at the time?
Hope.
Hope.
Hope that even if we don't get it right, what you do next matters. That even if you didn't know I didn't know how to use my voice, I didn't know I had a voice. You keep experimenting, you learn something new, you learn that you might have a voice, that you could have impact, and actually your story resonates with other people, and you're fundamentally building something new. The world is big. A lot of the problems we're navigating are gnarly. It can feel really overwhelming. But to both have hope and to take action to co-create a different future, that to me is a life worth living. And hopefully living more fully for you and for the people around you.
Beautifully said. On that point, Elaine, I want to thank you so very much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. Such an insightful and wonderful conversation. And I asked you before we started recording, the very beginning, what would make this a great conversation for you? And to paraphrase, you basically said a connection between the two of us, a human-to-human connection, a real conversation. And I wanted to share that because not only did I feel that during our time today, but you express yourself so well, and your ability to take information and distill it and provide it in a tangible and actionable way is powerful. That's a gift. And I just want to acknowledge you and let you know how grateful I am for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay.
It is my pleasure. And for all of you, I want to thank you so very much for watching and listening. And I have a very quick favor. Would you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts? Let us know what you thought about this episode. Maybe share one or two key takeaways. I know there's going to be more than that, but maybe share one or two with us. That helps us expand our reach and attract amazing guests just like Elaine. And to listen to more podcasts, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click that podcast button, and until next time, keep learning and growing, and we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.